All right. I always hate doing this on my computer because it is slow. Um, so much in life we need to catch up on, and a computer is not high on my list right now. But since I started the podcast, it probably will be. All right. So the lighting on me is weird right now. I'm gonna go like this. Let me know if the sound is okay. Anybody who pops on here, I'm gonna give anybody who's on. Let me know if you can hear me okay. I think I have my mic plugged in. Now, tonight's discussion, I think, might. I always get leery as I get into the witch wound because it's the one that I feel is so prominent in its relation to not only birth but motherhood, and it's also the one that feels um the most I don't even know the word for it. Not divisive. It feels like the thing that will create the most reactions. It'll bring up the deeper feelings of kind of ridicule. I think there's a lot of fear around witch, the word witch. There's a lot attached to it. We've been, we've really, if you think of our history and just think about the kind of history we've been taught. Now, it's also important to note that, I think I said this in the last video, we're told a history, but what we're told and how we read things in books is just a single perspective often. Like we've heard, if you've ever heard the quote, history is written by the victors, I think that's a super prominent thing we need to pay attention to because it's really, really true. And I think if anything can be learned around the witch wound, it is that the victor wrote the story about the witches. Um, Religion, the dogmatic religious groups, for the most part, wrote the story around the witches and how we now perceive a witch. A Just think about what comes up in your body when you think of witch. Just think of the word and what's like the first thing that pops in your mind. It's probably not divine birthing mother or healer or angel. I mean, like, even think of Halloween. Even the new movie Wicked. Well, I say new movie. I followed Wicked for a long time back in school. Um, we did the songs in choir, and I went to the Broadway show. Anyways, what we see on TV and in theaters and everything, it's a very carefully crafted story around what a witch is, about what magic is. And only in recent years have we started to see a more honest and subjective, or not subjective, more neutral view, I guess, alternative view of what witches are. Um, I've watched a lot of shows around witches and magic and weird like fantasy things. I love it. I love all of it. Um, but one that really brings up the history that we've been told, and it can feel very visceral in the body to see how women were treated in this era and back in 1600s to 1700s in Europe. So first, the witch trials started in Europe, namely Scotland, I believe, before it ever came to America. And the show Outlander, I'm reading the books now. However, I'm obsessed with the show Outlander. And that show really brings into view how someone who is an herbal healer, midwife, very nature based women circles essentially were automatically deemed evil witches because it went against the Christian beliefs of the time. So it became a very religious war against witches. Um, and it's been something that has now been stored in the bodies of women for a long time, and we still see the residual effects of what these witch trials, what these condemnations of women did, because through these scenarios of the witch trials, of basically it's a war on paganism. I mean, if we really want to get down to it, it was a war on paganism so that the considered superior religions could be pushed above the others. And there's so much religious war throughout the world. It's a constant part of our history. But the traumas it creates in our bodies, the residual pain it creates in our bodies is so unacknowledged. And the witch wound in particular is one that affects women. And it affects women in birth in particular. And I feel like it comes up the strongest when we deal with pregnancy and birth, because birth is the moment that women are brought beyond the veil. They're brought up to the veil between the earth and spiritual realm. We're literally ushering in spirits into this world. And anyone who's had a really powerful birth experience can tell you are at such a high state of consciousness when you are deep into the depths of the primal physiological, like the freedom of birth, home birth, just in your power. You are brought to the veil and you're really between realms. And in that moment is where women truly realize their divine magic. And it makes it difficult to come back out of birth, especially if you've held religious beliefs, to be able to try to come back and make sense of what you experience. So then women experience these things without having much preset, pre-foundational work into what an embodied birth feels like, what it really is, what sovereign birth truly is, and you get thrown into this experience where you have this transcendental expansion of consciousness where you're right at the realms, the veil of the realms. And it's such a highly spiritual experience, so expansive, so awakening. And it's hard to deny when you come back into this reality. And the hard part for so many women is coming back into your body after childbirth and trying to make sense of your experience, what you felt, the powerful alchemy that unfolds, and try to bring it back into the life that you were living. So women kind of come out of it trying to make sense in relation to like the religious beliefs they had, the way they've been raised, who they're married to, what their family's like, how to be a mom, all this allopathic system being thrown at you. We have all these societal expectations that are in such conflict to our primal motherly instincts, and it's very difficult to try to navigate them and not go crazy. Because you're the one who's made to seem crazy, just like the witches were made to seem evil and wrong. And we're persecuted for it. And we see this same revealing happen in birth if and when women begin to push back against the system that suppresses their divinity, their intuitive nature, their primal mammalian instincts. And this persecution dynamic continues to come up. We see it still. If a mother questions vaccines, she's just a silly stay-at-home mom. What does a mom know in comparison to a doctor? Go listen to the experts. The science tells us it's true. It's bullshit, because all that does is it diminishes the value of mothers, for one, and it tries to put any type of doctor or expert on a pedestal above everybody, all the other average citizens, above moms, so that if you go into a doctor's visit, you should feel inferior to them. You need to just comply. Go and listen to the expert's guidance. You're silly. Don't try to do your own research. Just do what the doctor tells you. Don't try to worry your brain about the stuff that doesn't matter. It's very parallel. That's what I'm trying to get across. There is a parallel to the wounds that are still being carried in the line of women from the time the witches were persecuted. The reasons the witches were persecuted was because they were a threat to the dogmatic religions of the time, the leaders of the time that saw anybody who went against the Christian dogma to be traitors. And of course, anybody who does earth-based healing, paganism, any of that is considered a threat to the establishment. So they create this story of witches being evil, doing dark magic, doing all this bad stuff. But really, they are a threat to the authorities. Anybody who is a free thinker, who is self-healing, who is earth-based, who works with herbal medicines, who is a midwife, they are a threat. Because once we begin to fully embrace our sovereignty, our freedom, the power of our bodies to birth, to be mothers, the sacredness that is, it brings a collapse to several systems. Now, you need to be aware that there is a very strong connection between our allopathic medical model and our government. They are one and the same, as well as the corrupt food industry. These are all profiting businesses. Initially, they may have been created with integrity, but now they are not. They do not function in integrity. They do not run on a foundation of integrity. And I'll stand behind that till I die. Because of the depth that I know and I see with my own intuitive understanding, my own third eye awakening that's happened, the way I can read the energy, the body language, the energetics of a person, or lack of soul, which is another thing to pay attention to. As you begin to embrace and embody those things, the veil begins to fall. And you will much more easily see where the corruption is held. I don't know if you can hear my kitty snoring. So the witch wound that we still hold in our body is very parallel to birth today. Because that fear and shame and the way that women had to hide their healing, their magic, their midwifery, their herbalism has carried down the line of women to where now we fear the same thing. We fear being bold, speaking up for ourselves, doing the things that we feel resonant with because of these stories of the past that condemned those things. So to embrace your magic, to embrace your intuition, to embrace your mysticism, there is a deep shame and fear and denial involved in that because we fear that persecution. It's like that lives in the body of women. It lives in our energetics of consciousness, of the collective. Because all of us in past lives have lived some extent of the witch trials. We were all some sort of character in these events. And to still hold that ancestral trauma, because it happened in the past, it's still a parallel timeline, if that makes sense. So when we get into pregnancy, I feel one of, even before pregnancy, if you can attack it before then. However, I think those types of wounds begin to rise more prominently in pregnancy because we are now being faced with the reality of our options. And we're being faced with this intuition and instinct that's coming up now as you step into mother, because when you're pregnant, you are still mother. There's this really divine energy that is activated within you. There's so many instincts that we are pulled to follow. And allopathy, even medical midwives, government officials, laws, whatever, encourage the suppression of the feminine intuition in sake of, for the sake of listening to the experts and the supposed people who are the authorities, the all-knowing, the ones who are supposedly out there for your greater good, like mandating vaccines or whatever else they recommend in birth, pregnancy, testing, whatever things they want to push on you. It's presented as for the good of you and your baby, but in reality, it is all part of a system that controls women in birth and suppresses your intuitive knowing, your instincts, the physiological nature of birth, and the power that you awaken when you surrender to the magic of your body. I'd be curious to know if anybody has a story where they felt that deep awakening really take hold as you were at the veil, that elevated consciousness in birth, where you really kind of was like, whoa, this was such a transcendental out of body experience. I don't even know how to explain, because I definitely had that with my second baby, first home birth. Now even looking back, I barely even remember the pain of it. I remember the intensity of contractions. I was in a birth tub. The contractions started really early in the morning. I waited till they got more consistent before I got in the tub, because the tub can kind of diminish the contractions. I remember the intensity, feeling him move. I had music on that really got me into a meditative state where I was really letting my body lead. My midwife got there maybe a half hour before he came out. But I remember that feeling after you give birth to that baby and just your full, raw, naked, vulnerable strength. It's such a deep vulnerability, but also one of the most powerful moments of your life. So it's this vulnerable power is probably the best way to explain it. And that's where I definitely say vulnerability isn't weakness. Sometimes vulnerability is your greatest power. And in birth is the best example for it. And then that kind of wave of emotion and relief and magic you feel it. You really feel that magic after birth of like, holy crap, that was amazing. And what I hope is that doing more of these things, being able to support women through their pregnancies, that type of moment can be felt by more and more women in our society, because it is not cultivated in a hospital. It's just not. Because if you have people who are constantly around you and chattering and checking on you and monitoring you and pressuring you, you are not allowed to surrender. You aren't in full comfort. You aren't able to surrender to your body. Yes, you might give birth vaginally and without drugs. But is that alone what defines a true embodied birth? No. That raw, vulnerable power where you were able to fully let go and kind of be in such freedom. If you're kind of in defense of yourself because all these people around you, you're not in that comfortable surrender. Maybe I think that might be the best word to describe it. That safe, protected, and comfortable surrender. So I'm going to leave it there tonight. I need to go to the gym. I'm in the process of creating my movement medicine series that is going to be available on my website. I'm working on making the videos now. And then after that, I have my Purify workshop that is going to be January 18th. If you want to sign up for that. I'm hoping the movement medicine will be launched soon, within the week, I'm hoping. And that will be available to purchase on my website. I think I'm selling it for $75. And it's going to include, it has an intro and a description or an explanation of where I came up with all this. And then it'll have at least 3 active movement videos. Yeah, so I'm really excited about that because I've been wanting to do that for a while, kind of get the movement medicine out there. And then the Purify workshop will be after that. And then I'm going to go into the Awaken and Expand. Awaken is going to be more about this type of stuff, that the purifying, because the movement medicine kind of links to the Purify, because it's more the physical, the intuitive body work mixed with the more nutritional based stuff that Purify covers. Purify will get a little bit more into kind of the emotional and body work as well, but movement medicine is a much deeper dive into it. And then Awaken is going to be more about in pregnancy and birth, awakening that deep, primal, mammalian, intuitive wisdom of women. Awakening and reclaiming that witch in us. And no longer letting it feel like a condemnation to be of divine witch. All women have witch inside them. Every single one. And the more we kind of feel that disconnection from it, and that shame, and that judgment toward what a witch is, it keeps us in disconnection from our divinity, our divine nature, and our connection with our magic and our magical gifts. And birth can really pull that out of us in ways that you can't even understand. So, and then Expand is going to be the last part of that series, and that's more into motherhood. More like homeschooling, wild schooling, radical unschooling, mothering with your instincts. Early breastfeeding things, co-sleeping, all of that. I touch on the things that I did as a mother and how I really allowed my instincts to lead. And ironically enough, how that affected my marriage and eventually ended my marriage. But I followed my instincts. So, I hope everyone has a great night. Thank you for joining.